Yo, what is up, everybody? Let's go back again. Another chapter from the story titled 50 Days After the Apocalypse, written by Ruber Rollinson. Remember to use the links in the description below. Show love to the author. Like, comment, and subscribe. Chapter 4. The next morning was spent in a tense silence, the actions of the previous day weighing heavily on both of the companions' minds. After quickly eating breakfast, the two of them packed up their sleeping bags, unbarricaded the door, and made to leave. All of them, same silence. The duo walked down the stairs, and John set about removing the second barricade on the front door. As she stood in the hallway, waiting, Amy could only help but look over at the man's crumpled body. It remained unchanged from the sad position it had fallen in yesterday after she had removed John's knives. Pausing for a moment on the stairs, Amy came to a decision. "Hold on a minute." John froze, hand on the door handle, casting about for a sign of danger. But instead of a raving infected, he saw his companion crouched over the older man's body. "What are you doing?" Amy ignored him as she began to dig through the man's pockets. After several seconds of searching, the girl made a quiet triumph noise as she pulled out a small leather wallet. "You're robbing him?" Again, John was ignored as Amy opened the wallet and took out a small laminated card. After staring at it for a moment, she gave a little nod of confirmation before standing up and storming over to John and shoving the item in his face. "Read it." John was tempted to push it away, but the look on her face told him this was not a point to argue over. Quickly scanning it, he began to read out what was written on the card. "Roberts, Mr. Andrew, September 11th, 1975. Why am I reading a driver's license? Remember his name. After what you did to him, it's the least you can do." "It's the only thing I'll do," John countered as he opened the door and the two of them began that day's perilous trek. In the days to come, a disturbing pattern was created. Each day was in itself unique and yet eerily similar. For Amy, the day would start in the middle of the night as she was awoken for guard duty. At roughly 7 in the morning, she would wake her companion with a sharp prod. What followed would be a silent cold breakfast, usually a can of food John had stored in his rucksack. Though, on their 8th day, they did treat themselves with stale bread they had found the day before. Food was a constant worry. Despite their best efforts at rationing within a week, the two were forced to scavenge for supplies during the day. After breakfast, they would break camp and set off into the streets, looking for food and a new place to stay. In the beginning, Amy would tell herself at the start of the day that she would look for survivors. This ambition was quickly crushed when John told her that to have survived this long, the survivors would be as twisted as he was. The day's length would vary from day to day based on how quickly they found shelter and how low the food supply was. In terms of shelter, the building needed to have at least 2 stories and a lot of space. Unfortunately, as the 2 companions spiraled into the center of the city in search of food, the ideal shelter became limited. As such, the days became longer, though the pair of them made sure to be in a shelter at least 2 hours before dusk. When they did find shelter there was a small matter of clearing the infected that undoubtedly lay in ambush inside. Amy had to admit that when it came to fighting infected, John was unparalleled. With an efficiency that bordered on scary, he would dispatch the creatures in mere seconds. Then came the worst part of the day. If John was able to trap one of the infected, he would perform his experiments on them. Initially, Amy had objected, still viewing the creatures with a shred of mercy. This ended on the 5th day, when an infected almost tore her throat out with its teeth. After that, she accepted whatever John did as a necessary evil and would leave the room to make camp. After John had finished, he would come and find her, normally wiping off one of his knives with a piece of cloth he would rip off of a curtain. Sometimes, if he was in a good mood, John would tell Amy what he had found, like the fact that the infected had no sense of smell, which he was extremely happy about, though he grudgingly told her that their sight and hearing could near superhuman levels, depending on the degree of deterioration. On some of the worst days, John would enter their camp and sit dejectedly in a corner, picking at the cold canned food they had to eat for dinner. As the days wore on and the situation became bleaker, John wouldn't stop his experiments till he had killed the infected, leaving its body as a bloody, unrecognizable mess of limbs. After an unusually silent meal at dusk, Amy would unfurl her sleeping bag, try to get a few hours' peace before the maddening cycle would begin again. Though Amy would never admit it, even to herself, a bond slowly formed between her and John. It could not be called a friendship after all. Most of their interactions were far from friendly. But at the same time, it was something deeper than that. A dependence on the other. It was not just a matter of needing the other for safety, but to them, the companionship was all that was keeping them sane. This new world, filled with monsters, this one bond between them was the only shred of normality they were to encounter for a very long time. Finally, on the 20th day after this whole nightmare began, the cycle was broken, but in its place arose a much more dire and dangerous situation. Amy was jolted awake as a hand clamped over her mouth. In a blind panic and half asleep, the girl's left hand began clawing at the dark figure that hovered over her, while her right shot out, searching for her bat. Slowly, the figure bent down and whispered in Amy's ear. "Stop it. Look, the infected have broken the front door down. We need to hide, now." Amy bolted upright, barely avoiding headbutting John in the process. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for any sign of danger as her companion slowly crept over to the doorway. Amy quietly crawled over to her bag as John poked his head out of the broken door. "Leave them," John hissed as he came back to retrieve his hockey stick before joining the girl by the bags. Moving silently, the man pulled out one of his knives, shoving it into his partner's left hand before grabbing another for himself. Without another word, John moved away towards the door, Amy following nervously behind them. With slow shuffling steps, the pair moved into the corridor. The grimy, bloodied walls were viewable by the light of the moon as it shone into the hallway through a crack in the boarded-up window at the end of the walkway. Amy opened her mouth to ask where they were going. That was when she heard it. Slow, hoarse breaths. And the house seemed to become colder as a dreadful chill filled the girl. Boom. A step. Floorboards creaked under the weight of a body. Boom. Closer this time. Amy's senses strained to their maximum as she visualized the downstairs room, trying to work out where the monster was. Boom, boom. There was more than one, and they were moving even closer as their dreadful breaths became more ragged, almost as if they could sense their prey was near. A small tug of her t-shirt made Amy jolt, focusing her attention on her partner as she silently motioned to the master bedroom. As quietly as possible, the pair moved, knowing their lives depended on them, making no noise. John reached the door first, pausing a moment to look over the solid oak door, checking it for cracks. Satisfied with the results of his inspection, the man gave a small affirmative nod as his knife hand snaked out lightly, pushing the slightly ajar door. The pair froze, listening, praying that the infected hadn't heard them. Dum, dum, dum. Faster now, on the stairs, the footsteps echoed through the hallway. To Amy, each step felt like a dagger, stabbing into her. John cursed as he shoved the door fully open, not caring as it let out another hideous shriek of protest. Running into the room, the man pointed at the wardrobe, where he practically threw himself behind the far end bedside table. Without a moment's hesitation, Amy rushed over to a piece of furniture, wrenching the doors open as more rushed, stumbling footsteps could be heard from the corridor. She had mere seconds to jump into the wardrobe and shut the doors behind her, or it appeared. The infected walked with a small stump as it walked into the room. The body of the infected was that of a man in his late 30s. Long brown hair was matted, dried blood, and the girl could make out the infected's dead, milky eyes, even from her hiding spot. With one shuddering step, the monster moved further into the room, craning its neck to the side, listening. It stood there motionless, the only sound its horrible, ragged breathing. Amy held her breath as she stared out of a crack at the infected, as she fought every bone in her body not to run out of her hiding space in a blind panic. After an eternity, the creature gave up. With slow, faltering steps, it turned around. Without meaning, to Amy, had knocked the door to the wardrobe. It could only watch in horror as it swung open. The infected's head snapped around its cold eyes, fixing on the wardrobe. Boom, boom. Slowly, ever so slowly, the creature moved towards the piece of furniture. Amy pressed herself against the backboard of the closet, relying on the darkness to hide her. It didn't matter. The infected came closer and closer, its head still held at the horrible angle it had slightly opened, preparation to bite. The girl could only watch as the monster crept closer to her. Closer and closer with each step, more of the creature was revealed. Amy could see every single tear in its clothes, every speck of spattered blood, and worst of all, those sharp, razor-like teeth that would soon be slicing through her flesh. Thump, thump. Then, it happened. The survivor and the infected's eyes met. In that instant, time seemed to just stop, as what little gap remained suddenly felt a lot smaller. Suddenly, the creature's face twisted into a snarl, and it lurched forward with surprising speed. Amy knew what she had to do. She knew she had to raise the knife in her left hand and defend herself. But she didn't. She couldn't. For in that single moment, the fear overwhelmed her, and Amy froze. It was all the infected needed. With uncharacteristic speed, the monster rushed onwards, arms extended, and its fingers mere inches away from the terrified girl. All of a sudden, John appeared, bursting forth from his hiding space and barreling into the infected, knocking it against the wall with a loud crash. Almost immediately, a second infected appeared in the doorway, attracted by the noise, the conflict. Snapping back to her senses, Amy charged forward, past John as he grappled with the first infected, swinging her bat as she moved, dealing the new infected a hard blow to the head. As the creature fell, a third appeared to take its place. The girl thrust her arms forward, stabbing the infected through the chest, but the monster continued on, unperturbed, as it swung its arm at Amy, its claw-like fingers racking the survivor's side, drawing blood. Quickly backing away, the girl swung her bat wildly in an attempt to gain space. Behind her, John was pushed back by the original infected as he struggled to stay upright. The man's legs connected with the bed, causing him to collapse onto it, losing his knife process. The monster dived forwards, eager to capitalize on its advantage, but John was quicker. In the blink of an eye, the man raised his legs and booted the infected in the face. The creature wheeled backwards, blood pouring from a clearly broken nose before it could recover, and John was on his feet with one huge two-handed swing of his hockey stick. The creature was dead. The feral joy brought on by his kill was abruptly halted as Hamie collided with him, causing both of them to end up sprawled on the floor. Towering above them, the final infected opened its gaping maw and plunged towards the pair. Acting on instinct, Amy threw her hands out to protect herself. The knife still clutched fervently in her left hand. It flew forwards before embedding itself to the skull of the infected, straight through its eyes. The monster convulsed several times before becoming limp, held up only by the knife. With one last surge of effort, the girl pushed the body to one side, or allowing it to fall on the floor. Boom. Now, ladies and gentlemen,